Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us at World of Pets podcast. We love having you here on a weekly basis. And we want our pets to live as long as possible, but we want that to be a good quality life. So, to that end, we on this podcast explore all things about pets and animals so that we can have them around for a long time, but they are living a quality life. So, again, thank you for joining us. Take it away, hosts.
Hello, everybody. I'm Anthony, and welcome back. David has a night off. He's on vacation. Joining us once again tonight is Robert Kaiser. How do you say that?
Keezer.
Kaiser. I was wrong on both accounts. From the Canine Friends Foundation. So, welcome back. Thanks for joining us again. Real quick, Bobby, if you would just kind of recap what we talked about last time and what you want to get into tonight.
I think last time we went over a few different things, but not really in depth. We went over some reactivity. We didn't really touch too much on how dogs learn, which I think we're going to do today, which is really, really important. And so I think I think what you guys are asking me for today was how someone can properly teach their dog to learn various behaviors.
Sure. But before we get into that, let's talk about real quick. Remind us of what the most important thing is that people should understand about how dogs learn. What is the most effective way for a dog to learn?
Repetition, they learn just like humans do.
Okay.
Repetition over and over. They also have to be well fed. They have to be comfortable. And well fed, what I mean by that is through their life, they just have to have a good, nice, balanced diet. Serotonin, 90% of it is generated in the gut. The other 10's in the brain. And serotonin's it's a hormone and a neurotransmitter. And it's that substance that gives us confidence, it makes us feel calm, and it makes us feel happy.
Yeah.
So in order to properly train a dog, like we do here at Canine Friends Foundation, we feed the dogs really good food. And it's expensive, but we do have people that are kind enough to donate some very good food. We won't feed them any kind of food like Beneful or Pedigree because it's full of cereal. The first ingredients a lot of times are cornmeal or something. So we want them to get the protein because they are carnivores and they do need a lot of protein, but they also need grains. So don't feed your dogs grain-free food. That's kind of a fad that went on for a while, but they really do need grains. I mean, wolves kill herbivores. They don't kill other predators. And herbivores do have grains in the guts and stuff because they are herbivores. So anyways, so that's a really important place to start, is just a good solid diet. Now, when you go to teach your dog, since they do learn from repetition, it really helps if your dog has a strong motivator. That motivator can be food. Mostly it is food, but it has to be a real high-valued treat. If you give them a very low-valued treat, their focus can move from the treat rather rapidly to something else in the room, something else even in their mind. So we tend to use turkey, real turkey, steak, and we'll cut it up into tiny, tiny little pieces because you don't want to fill them up during training, because then the training will stop when the motivation goes away if they get full. If your dog's not seriously motivated by food and is also not motivated by toys or praise, then one of the things you can do is before you can start your training before you feed your dog, say in the morning, so that the dog is a little hungry and is much more motivated to get that food. Sometimes, if you're really lucky and have a dog, you can use the kibble that you may be feeding the dog as the reward if the dog likes it that much. But in initial training, you really do need a fairly high value reward. You want the dog to work for that. And since we're doing repetition, you're going to be giving them treat, treat, treat. So whenever they start to do a behavior, and it's the beginnings of something you want, you're going to reward them.
Sure.
Very important part here is the trainer has to have a lot of patience and cannot get frustrated. If one does find themselves getting frustrated when they're trying to teach a dog something, it's best just to stop. Because the dog's going to smell the pheromones, they're going to body language, and they're not going to be real comfortable. So the dog needs to be comfortable, happy. The training should be purely positive and a lot of fun. The dog should, you say the word "let's train," the dog should. I don't know what we're going to do, but this is going to be cool.
Yeah.
So I was teaching one of my dogs the other day just a dumb command circle. Just turn in a circle when I say circle. And so since dogs do learn by repetition, I will take the treat and I will try to lure them around in a circle. If they don't easily lure in a circle, then what I'll do is I'll take the treat, I'll show it to them, I'll walk back to get them walking, and then start moving it. And then their head will turn to look at it and then keep going to get them to do a circle. And then once they complete the circle, they get the treat. If you don't complete the circle, they don't get the treat because you don't want to reward them for not completing the behavior. Now, if you're having a very difficult time with your dog, say making a circle, and this can apply to any behavior, then what you do is you start with half a circle. Get them to go halfway and then reward it, halfway and then reward it. And keep doing that over and over and over. And then you start to lure them further and further until they make a complete circle. So that sometimes you have to take very small steps.
Sure.
If you're trying to train a dog to do something for the movies where you chain many behaviors together, they always start with an initial behavior that's taught, then another one's that's taught, and then they'll start to chain those one after the other, but they're not going to chain, say, 5, 6, 7 behaviors in a row to start with. So, that's even broken up into little steps. The most important part of that is you can't get frustrated because the dog get frustrated, and it's no longer fun for the dog. I mean, this has to be the dog's, and by the way, this builds engagement. I mean, the dog is bonding with you during this time, and you guys should both be having a lot of fun. The other part about teaching your dog is just like human beings, they have a limited attention span. Never spend more than 5 minutes training your dog. Some you can spend 7 minutes, and then once your dog really gets used to training, you'll be able to gauge it yourself how long you can spend training them. But typically, never more than 5 to 7 minutes, because the dog's going to start losing focus and just going to get tired of doing this behavior you're trying to teach them. Don't expect that behavior to happen overnight. Some dogs are really good learners, Malinois, Shepherds. I have a lot of pit bulls. I say they learn in Jamaican time. They just take their time. You tell them to sit, and they're like, "Yeah, I'm sitting. I'm going to sit." You do that with a Malinois, you can teach them to just slam their butt to the ground. So your expectations regarding the breed of dog you're working with, it has to be. So, some dogs learn quick, some take a lot longer. And if you have dogs, such as border collies or Aussies or something that are really herding dogs, you can train them behaviors that kind of feed into their herding ability, like throwing something, go get it, bring it back. pushing an object around with their nose. You can use some of their genetically programmed instincts to help you train them to do certain behaviors. And then, like people, I don't know, when I went to college and stuff, at the beginning it was tough, but after a while, sitting down and studying wasn't really that hard to do. It just became a habit. That's the other thing. You want to do this repetition so often that the dog picks it up as a habit. And in that case, the dog doesn't necessarily have to be fed every single time. Is there anything about that part of it? Because there's more.
Oh, so I think what you're touching on is a topic we've entitled "Common Training Mistakes of Dog Owners." You've talked about consistency in training, which is key. Be consistent. Don't reward them if they're not completing the training task. Expecting dogs to learn too quickly. This is probably a mistake I think is most common, is expecting dogs to learn too quickly. We talked about how with humans, they need that consistency of repetitiveness over and over and over again, and being patient with them. And then the only thing we really need to talk about is sending mixed signals. And I think you touched on that when you talked about if you reward them before they complete the task or the training, then you're kind of sending those mixed signals.
Correct. Sending mixed signals is very easy to do. People do it all the time. For example, the first thing you need to do when you're training a dog is nonverbal training. You don't speak to them. You use your body language, mainly your hand
signals.
Hand signals. And if you have a dog that's had abuse problems in the past, you need to be a little careful with that till they trust your hand movements. So you want your hand you want your hand to move slowly, but it has to move the exact same way every time. So if I want a dog to sit, I'll hold the treat and I'll just do this slightly up over the head. Generally, the butt goes down as the dog looks up and then they sit. And we just do that maybe 50 to 100 times. And then once they key off body language, then we pair the command to the movement. So now they're learning that we say sit, and then we wait a moment, and then we give the hand. So we say sit, and then we help the dog sit. And eventually the dog starts to key off your voice. Now, this is really critical that you don't move any other part of your body. You want the dog to learn how to sit from your command eventually, from a verbal command. I will bet you 95% of the people out there that say, yeah, my dog sits when I say sit. I'll bet you when they do something when they say sit, that dog's looking at them and that person is doing something. And the way you can tell through body language, they may even be moving their eyebrows. The way you can tell is have someone turn around, tell their dog to sit, and see if the dog sits. If the dog doesn't sit, it doesn't understand the verbal command. It's still living off of your body language. You could just raise your head a fraction of an inch. And if you did that every single time you did this to teach the dog to sit, the dog's also going to key off of your head. So they're primarily body language driven. Verbal is not a big drive for a dog. It's not a real important sense to a dog. They hear things, but they can hear and they can do directional hearing by moving their ear. So they're just trying to spot something if they're hunting.
Sure.
But the sounds are just not as important. They're not, there's olfactory is the most important, visuals the second, and verbal is right there with touch. They're about the same. Taste, of course, dogs have horrible taste. They don't really have the buds we have. But if you want to test yourself, you want to test your dog, turn around, tell your dog to sit. And if your dog's well trained, you should be able to turn back around, dog should be sitting. And then, so that one I always find kind of interesting. So we got to be very careful. So when I'm teaching a dog, I don't move any other part of my body, including my eyes and stuff. I just give them this kind of one verbal and one nonverbal command. It can be luring, like teaching them to do a circle. And then eventually you get to the point like one now where all I do is this and the dog does a circle. So now I'll start applying the command, circle. And then the dog won't know what that means. So I'll do this. And then the dog circles. And then I give him a treat. And then we keep doing that. So the whole idea is dogs do like to anticipate what's going to happen. That's really common. You know, you get up, and if you do certain things that says I'm going to my car, even though you're not, the dog still may anticipate that, oh, I'm going to walk over to the door. So eventually you'll be able to say circle. A little bit of this won't be needed anymore, and the dog will just start circling. And you do that for 2, 3. It can take 500 repetitions for a dog to solidly learn a command. It's not 10, 20, or 40 that a lot of people think. And this is if you want, 99.9% compliance, which is kind of what we're looking for. But if you change the inflection of your voice, that can cause confusion. As you were just mentioning, that becomes inconsistent. So and it's hard for people to keep the same inflection, but it's very important to do so. That's why clicker training works so well, because when you hit that clicker, it's the exact same note tone every single time. It doesn't go through inflections or anything like that. So clicker training does work very well. I do recommend it. We use it here as well on different dogs at the very beginning. But eventually they're going to have to respond to your voice. And once you go through that 3, 4, 500 repetitions, they'll start to respond to your voice, even if you do have slight inflections or something like that. Place is a wonderful thing to teach your dog. They're barking at the door. You say place, they go over, they place. It's a really good command. It's easy to teach, and you want to teach them to be able to say place for stay there for. They could stay there for up to a few hours, but usually what happens is they're after 5 minutes or something of placing on a dog bed or something, they kind of just fall asleep. They're just there for a while, then they just kind of fall asleep.
Sure. Let's talk about the dog's body language now. Let's talk about stress indicators and confidence versus fear on how a dog gives those off. So if a guy is, if an owner is training a dog, what are some of the dog's signals that they can look for that the dog is stressed, fearful, or confident?
Okay. Stress, the dog will yawn.
Okay.
When a dog yawns, they're usually kind of letting off some stress. When a dog shakes, they're letting off some stress. If you're trying to work a dog and they all of a sudden start sniffing on the ground, that's again a stress reliever. If you see their tail start to tuck a little bit underneath, they're saying this is uncomfortable for me, which could mean your tone is a little rough and they're not comfortable with that tone, or your tone's too high.
Sure.
If you have too high, if you do the baby talk to a dog, you're going to excite the dog, and then that's kind of sort of the opposite of being stressed, but it's escalating the dog's behavior, and then the dog is just, I want to run, I want to play, I want to do something else. Last thing I want to do is pay attention to you. So you need kind of just a nice normal voice. As far as fear goes, a lot of times dogs will, if you're first meeting them, if they're fearful, a lot of times they might kind of sort of come to you and then back up and go in a corner, or they'll start shaking just a hair. Usually it's the back legs that'll shake just a little bit if they're feeling afraid. And you can get them over that pretty quick if you just handle them calmly, feed them. If a dog won't, and this is another one with stress, if you go to feed a dog, give it a treat, and this happens a lot when dogs are meeting other dogs when we're walking them together. If the dog won't take the treat, the dog is stressed. People don't really eat when they're stressed, and neither do dogs. Or they could be a little fearful, but there's something about the environment that is unsettling to them. And once you can get them to start taking the treat, then you can start moving them further a lot quicker. If we're having dogs meet each other, we have a protocol we go through, and we walk them together and eventually try to get them close by each other in parallel walking. And we know we can start moving them closer together when the two dogs are both taking treats. Then we could start closing the gap. If we get to a point where they won't take treats, it's a really easy way for the dog to say, I'm not comfortable here right now. Or if the dog lifts its paw slightly, that is also something that says, I'm a little stressed. I don't like this environment. There's something going on. I smell it. I hear it. I'm not sure what it is if they just kind of like lift a paw. So these are all things to watch out. Too many people, when they have dogs and they go to have them interact together, especially if they're adopting another dog, if they don't pay attention to these signals, then they'll start getting them close enough, then all of a sudden one of them will just lunge at the other, and dogs are so much quicker than we are. So these are little things we can watch with our dog to make sure they're comfy. I mean, if your dog's walking, its tongue's hanging out the side of its mouth, and it's looking around, and its head's bobbing, and kind of has this cool gait to him, that's a happy dog. And that should always be reinforced with good boy, good girl, a pat, and that kind of thing.
Real quick in closing, two things as we wrap this down, Bobby. Tell us your favorite success story from rehabilitating dogs, and give the best bit of advice you can give to new dog owners.
My favorite success story?
Yeah.
Well, it's one that wasn't not that long ago. I have a big, strong dog named Lewis, and he's up for adoption now. But and there are a lot of people wanting him euthanized. He had a horrible, horrible self-escalation problem. He wasn't that old, maybe a year and a half or so. But he was never trained. But he would get so excited that he would start to jump up, and then he would self-escalate. He'd jump up further, he'd get more excited, and then start biting. I mean, and he would bite. It wasn't a net. He would start biting at the person and jumping and biting. And then, he just basically took himself from, I'm kind of happy, to this over threshold state really quick. And the problem with that one is, even though he's a sweetheart dog, at that time, he would start generating a lot of cortisol. And that self-escalation can go from, being a happy dog to all of a sudden a dog that just, they'll go on the attack or something like that, because they've gotten themselves too hyped up. It's like two kids on a schoolyard, and one just gets, we're playing, next thing you know, there's a big fight. So he does not do any of that anymore. He is a sweetheart. I'm still working a little bit with recall on him, but his recall is phenomenal, mostly because I don't think he likes to be away from me or anybody else when he's around him. And he's kind of lazy now. So he knows not to bite at feet, not to do any of these initial behaviors that would start him to self-escalate. And if he even starts to do one, he understands if you kind of grab the lead and hold it down to hold him for a moment. He quickly understands, okay, I'm getting too out of control. I mean, there's been a lot of them in the past, but that's kind of the most recent one. And the reason I think it's so wonderful for me is because so many people wanted him euthanized, and there was no reason to do it. But he did need a tough handler, but not mean. And he did need bonding to somebody, and he did need to be treated well. But he did need some of this tough training. And he's never bitten me or anything like that. But there were people in the past that they didn't realize where he was going with this, and then he wound up biting them. What was the other one?
What advice would you give? What's the first bit of advice you'd give to a first-time dog owner?
First-time dog owners, give your dog space. When you bring them home, give them space. Crate train them. Dogs, once they get crate trained, they love the crate. It becomes sanctuary for them. Never discipline them and then run them into the crate. The crate has to be a safe place. Feed them in the crate. Give them treats in the crate. Whenever they get into a crate, even if they grab something you don't want them to have, if they take that into the crate, and it's really hard for people, unless it's something, of real value, just kind of, once they're in the crate, let them understand the crate is safety. Later on, you can go in and say, here, give me the thing. Also, use the leash. And when you bring a dog home, and the most successful adoptions I've had, put the leash on a dog and leave it on for a couple of weeks. If the dog jumps on the couch and you don't want him on the couch, you don't push them off or grab their collar. You use the lead, and you just kind of here, get them off, and then tell them, no, you can't go on the couch. Whatever you're going to do at the beginning, because a lot of dogs are not going to be understanding what the rules are of your house. Use the leash. If you grab them by the collar, you're probably going to get bit. You grab them by the ruff of the neck, you're going to get bit. And certainly if you go pushing them around on the side of their body, you can get bit. These are all things the dog doesn't understand.
Sure.
But the leash is wonderful. And they get used to walking around with the leash in the house. I do it all the time with the dogs I have here. And so that would be a really important thing. It takes them a few days to adapt, takes them a few weeks to really start to understand this might be their home, and it can take a few months. So there are more behaviors that are going to surface, good and bad, over the next few months when you have the dog. So you don't want to let the bad ones go too long. If your dog's reactive to other dogs, try to get that fixed fairly quickly. If your dog's misbehaving or doing behaviors you don't really like, don't wait long. Consult a trainer and take care of it as quick as you possibly can. Because if you don't, it becomes harder to extinct those behaviors because they can become a habit. And it's really hard to break habits, as we know.
Sure, absolutely. Awesome. Well, thanks again, man. Bobby, you are just a fountain of knowledge and information when it comes to this topic, and your years of experience show. We appreciate you coming on again and gracing us with your knowledge and experience.
This is wonderful. I'll be set up much better, so I'll have a clearer face.
Sure.
These are first two podcasts I've ever done. I do an area that I'm preparing for that. But I really enjoy passing on the info. I do read the papers, the books, and discuss with other trainers. And you're going to hear some things from me that other trainers may disagree with.
Sure.
That's just life. It's life. But as long as it's not something that's going to hurt a dog or make a dog mean, it's fine. But I wouldn't go shocking a dog because you don't want them on a counter, for example. That's not Doesn't teach the dog anything.
Well, as always, we want to thank our sponsor and co-founder, the original OG, Deb. We want to do a little plug for her at debspets.com. That's DEBSPETS.com. Bobby, tell them where they can find your information, but also let's emphasize what they can do to support your mission.
CanineFriendsFoundation.org. I'm still in the process of developing the site, but there are contact forms and phone numbers on there that everyone is welcome to use. I do give out free advice a lot of times over the phone, certainly for rescue dogs coming from the shelters. We always need volunteers to help cleaning at the facility, walking the dogs, and it's pretty easy to teach someone to teach a dog basic obedience. So we do teach our volunteers how to communicate with the dog, and we teach them the body language so they can provide some basic obedience. So they do get to learn things, and we there's the normal stuff, cleaning kennels. I mean, we did a lot today. We almost finished the snake fencing today. We're going to be cleaning up a lot of debris and everything the next couple of days. And, it's never ending. But you can go on Facebook, Canine Friends Foundation's on Facebook. We're going to be creating a presence on the other social media sites.
Good. All right. Well, we'd like to encourage folks to find Canine Friends Foundation, see what you can do to help. And as always, thank you for joining us. Until next time, we'll see you. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm glad that you joined us for At World of Pets podcast. We would like for you to take a look at what our sponsors have to offer, and that sponsor is debspets.com. You can access it through the QR code, or you can just go to the website. So thank you for joining us, and hope to see you again next week.